I'm Alan Jaglenzer. I'm the professor of financial accounting at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School. I also lead the coordination of the Cambridge Disinformation Summit projects. And this is fundamentally an aggregator of research faculty from around the world across discipline who coordinate on policy with policymakers to try to help inform people about the harms from malign influence campaigns, from disinformation and from misinformation, and also to try to figure out how we can intervene on some of the harms. We're reintroducing the webinar series because there's a lot of content that we'd like to get out to people, and I'm excited to restart this with my guest, Diane Benscoter. Diane is the founder and the executive director of Antidote. She's the author of a book that I just finished listening to that she narrates on Audible, among other places, called Shoes of a Servant, My Unconditional Devotion to a Lie. And she was a speaker at our very first Disinformation Summit in 2023, which we called Entrenched Beliefs. And one of the reasons I reached out to her was roughly during the pandemic when I started wondering, like, why are people following what to me seemed pretty obvious lies? What was this about? Why were they entrenched in this? Why couldn't they listen to alternative reasoning? I found a bunch of books that and articles that steered me into how this happens, why people get sucked in, but very few people had any ideas on how to help people get out. And I came across Diane's work, and she was one of the first I found who could articulate very clearly how to support people around manipulative environments. And I reached out to her and I found her to be incredibly compelling. So I've invited her back to talk today about influence. And Diane, I was hoping we could start with maybe you sharing what you're currently working on now and how sort of your prior history kind of informs that work, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and thank all of you for coming. Um, my past, as as Alan just pointed out, I was in a controlling environment. I was in a religious cult. It was, many of you knew it as the Moonies. And then after I was, quote, deprogrammed, after there was an intervention that my family did, I started working with people as a deprogrammer. That's a term that we don't use anymore. I don't know anyone that does that type of work anymore where people are essentially held against their will and go through an intervention. But all of that work and since then I've spent much of my life talking with people who were had family members they were concerned about or people who were leaving. And that has definitely informed the work that I do now, both in the vision of Antidote, the nonprofit, and also the approach of how we do it. So our main initiatives right now, we have three programmatic areas. The first and kind of our flagship program is a learning community where people can learn about psychological manipulation. And psychological manipulation happens in five different phases. And so we emphasize that in the learning community, and we understand that people have different needs when they come to the learning community to understand what psychological manipulation is. A lot of people come because they have loved ones, people they're concerned about that they've seen a change in them and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to talk to them. So the five phases are vulnerability, real quick. Vulnerability, that's what many people are experiencing right now in the world, feeling scared, not having community, not knowing how to understand this world they live in. And then the next phase is initiation. That's where they're getting pulled in. That's where the messaging is working and they're starting to get pulled in. The next one is active, where they're actively involved, they're really committed. And then that can start breaking down. That's the leaving stage where they're thinking about leaving or in the process of leaving. And then there's the healing stage. So we really try to educate people and deconstruct each of those areas in everything we do because it matters what phase someone is in. So we have the learning community where we have online courses. We have one right now about to launch called Understanding Psychological Manipulation. And then we have learning groups where people can take a deeper dive to really deconstruct their own situation, whatever that may be, and kind of understand how to talk to people more effectively and such. And then we'll have um, instructor-led opportunities, webinars and such, for people to bring in teachers and people who can look at specific things. So that's the learning community. And then we have another project called the Stories Bank, where we're really excited about this. People can tell their stories about going through those five phases, no matter what it was, whether it was in just a domestic violent kind of situation where psychological manipulation was used, or much larger, and on the other side of the extreme, for instance, a terrorist group that they may have joined. So no matter what, whether it was just a scam or something very serious, they still kind of move through those five phases. So we want to hear their stories through those five phases, record them, and then give them advocacy training so that they can use their stories for the greater good. So that's the stories campaign. And underneath that is a real opportunity. There's so much data involved in that to start to create a greater evidence base around psychological manipulation so that we can understand it better and understand what works more effectively. And then the third project we call AIM, it's the um, Attention Integrity Movement. And we're really excited about this. This is a way for the online psychological manipulation that's happening to address that in a scalable way. And that's a project that we feel like there's three main phases of that. One's inoculation, where we kind of promote an anti-manipulation identity and use influencers to help people understand and want to have an anti-manipulation identity. And then next is to help people, that's kind of a marketing challenge. And then there's an educational challenge after that to help people understand more of the mechanics of psychological manipulation without blaming people that have fallen prey to it. And then the third is more of a community building problem, and that has to do with people who are vulnerable for good reasons, and they need an off-ramp, other places to go where there's not manipulation going on, where they can get their needs met. So those are the three main initiatives that we're working on right now.
Okay, thank you. Can we explore this vulnerability concept a little bit more? Like, why are people, and even your own experience, what were you seeking? What was sort of the psychological manipulation when when you get pulled into that? Is there something specifically that you're looking for, or
Yeah, and that varies, but they're very human needs. They have to do with, like, for me personally, I was really upset about the Vietnam War, and that really dates me, but um, and that's interesting that today there's so many people right now that are living in fear because of the war. And but I was really upset about it, and I was very idealistic. I was young. I was looking for easy answers to life's hard questions. And I think that so many people feel like they just want to understand this world we live in. They want to have community, to be around people that care about the things they care about, and to feel like your life has meaning and that you can use your life for something important. Those are just basic human desires and needs. And I think that so many people have those vulnerabilities, but there's also just like people that are struggling financially. Sometimes scams will offer an opportunity to make money. And so any psychological pain that people experience is a vulnerability.
thank you. And how are opportunists finding these vulnerabilities? For you in your story, they seem to be hanging around university campuses, but now it's probably easier. Do you have a sense for like how do I identify where the target audience might be?
Um, well, they have always manipulators, psychological manipulators, people that grafters, whatever, are always looking for specific types of people. Like there's a cult for everyone, we always say in the anti-cult movement. So you seek out your demographic sort of. And so, yeah, college campuses were a good place for the Moonies. Um, Keith Raniere, if you know about him from Nexium, he's in prison now, but he was seeking more of the young people that were looking to really be successful, potential movie stars, people that were really wanting to be better. So that was more of a self-improvement type of a group. People that are angry about social issues might be more drawn to political type of groups. So whatever you're wanting, you throw your fish line out to that demographic and try to pull them in. So first you want their attention, then you want to hold their attention, then you want to influence their decisions, and ultimately you want to shape their identity and their habits. So that's kind of the process that manipulators will try to do.
Yeah, that's in line a lot with what I'm seeing now too, with the idea of trying to create identity in community, and also soothing anxieties about a lot of it right now is grievance around financial, I think,
Yeah.
particularly in the arenas that I'm working in. You've been working though, like I remember you said you were working with January 6 prisoners or former prisoners at one point, and others. Like, how do you help people understand? Because they're how do you break through to them? What kind of tactics have you been using, or what kinds of conversations are you having with people to try to help them
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah, you know, it's less about some tactic than it is about helping them understand the mechanics of psychological manipulation. And what I've experienced is that, people try to combat the belief systems and to try to argue about the disinformation and show people that they're wrong about the disinformation and or the pack of lies that a cult or a group is using. But really, that all crumbles. Those are all, disinformation is full of holes. You don't want to see it when you're getting your psychological needs met. But once it's pointed out to you how psychological manipulation works, and I always talk to people about, just, is there a possibility that you might be experiencing what I experienced, or so many other smart people have experienced? And the last thing you want to do is shame anyone and make them feel like, they don't have good critical thinking or whatever. You really want people to understand that this could happen to anyone. And let's just look at the possibility that maybe this happened to you. So let's take a look at how psychological manipulation works and how it's affected so many other people. I use a lot of personal stories or stories from other types of people so that they can say, yeah, that's definitely psychological manipulation. If I, pull up Jim Jones or something. Yeah, that was sure psychological manipulation. Okay, let's look at the tactics that he used. And isn't that sort of like what happened to you? And if they can then start to see it, it all just crumbles. That whole belief system, all of the holes in the disinformation starts to appear. So it's really about helping them see that they are not unlike so many other smart people that have been tricked in this way. And once you have to win their trust. They have to agree to talk to you, and not with defensiveness, but with an actual interest in the possibility that maybe they've been had in some way. So that's really how it works.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on that in a minute, but first I'm going to invite the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand and then I can give you the mic to ask the question in a minute. So go ahead and raise your hands if you have questions because we'll come to them whenever. You can alternatively put them in the chat if you prefer to type them up. My next question is, I remember listening to your story from the book, and what I sense was as you were going through the deconstruction in the learning phase of your own experience, if I were to characterize it, there was like a mourning phase almost. Like you went through a mourning or a loss, like a sense of loss. Can you explain what it was like coming to the realization that you've been had and that because I remember you saying like I've wasted, I'm probably terribly paraphrasing your story, but you felt like you had wasted a lot of time on a false thing, right? So can you talk through how that feels and what that was like and how you processed all of that?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It's extremely painful. It's devastating. It felt like, and I joined at age 17 and came out 5 years later. And so those formative years, those years when so much happens to most people, um, as far as identity creation. And for me, it was a huge identity crisis. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea what I believed. I didn't know what music I liked or what clothes to wear. I didn't have friends because I had walked away from or disenfranchised most of my relationships completely. And so it was extremely painful. And it's so important when working with people who are currently being manipulated or have just walked away to help them with integrity and to help them to rebuild their agency and autonomy. That is what's taken from you, your identity, your agency, your autonomy. That is what is stolen. And so it's hard to explain how painful that is to realize that your identity was taken away. And in some cases, depending on what group you were with, you have to kind of reflect on what harm you may have done to others. If you recruited a bunch of people into the group that you were part of, and your relationship with your loved ones, how you strained that. I know that I created so much pain, especially for my mother. So all of those things come crashing down on you. I remember thinking, when the moment that I understood what had happened, I I thought I heard glass breaking around me. It was like this very visceral kind of experience of the world was crashing down.
And what was it that hooked you though? I mean, what if you were to come back, how did they capture you, or were you just ready for somebody to capture you? Was there something specific that they said to you that resonated so powerfully that you're like, okay, I need to be part of this? And if so, what do you remember how they engaged you? Like, what was it that got them to pull you in so tightly for that long?
Well, they were going to change the world. They were going to stop war. They were The second coming of Christ had happened. And I was chosen by God to be a disciple. That was the story that was the pack of lies. And so all of a sudden, these people that were surrounding me in this group, they seemed like so happy and they seemed so confident and they seemed to have the answers that I was seeking. I just wanted to be part of it. And I think that's a really important aspect to understand is that whether it's an online group or it's an in-person group, if you feel like you've found your people, if you feel like you've found like-minded people and it makes you feel better, it relieved the pain that I had. I was a lost teenager trying to understand how I was going to live in this world. And suddenly that was all taken away from me. I went from a lost teenager to a disciple of the second coming of Christ. That's a really huge promotion, you know?
So you mentioned though there was an intervention. Would you have stayed in without the intervention? I mean,
I think so.
or because I recall my interpretation
Yeah.
of what you were narrating in your story was that you were starting to question some of what was happening, and you were also cheating some of the underlying system, even on how you
Yeah.
were. So did that cognitive dissonance ever pop in and resonate strongly enough that you're like, wait, what am I actually doing? Or could you have self-extracted at any point, or was it
Possibly.
required?
Possibly. It was really nice. I mean, it was so helpful to have a support system. And I immediately afterwards started working at a rehab house for people leaving different cults. So that was really helpful for me to rebuild identity and such. But yes, oftentimes that does happen. People start seeing through the holes in the system, or they start missing their family, or they start feeling so isolated, and it's not all it was promised. And so it does start breaking down. And I think that's an important concept to understand if you're trying to look for a way in to help people, is that you look for those cracks. I think of it as somebody with a this shell around them, but there are cracks in it. And if you can see a crack and plant a seed for them to think about, that's going to start growing and making that crack bigger. And so it will fall apart eventually for many people. It's kind of a crisis of faith that happens or something in that realm. And people can self-extract, and hopefully they'll find some resources that will help them understand what happened to them and why it happened so they don't just beat themselves up or jump to another group off the we call it cult hopping in the anti-cult field. And it's because you're even more vulnerable when you come out. That didn't work. I thought that was the answer, and now I'm really lost and I'm humiliated that I thought that that was it and it's not. So I'm going to find something else that is all that. So especially I
Yeah,
think the new
yeah, I can see
age
that.
kind of guru types that they hop around a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. On a related note, we actually have an audience question related to hopping out. It was, what was it that shattered the glass for you, and how did you reconstruct your trust in yourself and conviction in your own beliefs after you had that realization?
Yeah, thank you. It was Robert Lifton's work, his book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It, he, there was a lot of people in that era used his work, and still it has stood the test of time. In his book, there was a chapter where he defined what he referred to as brainwashing, and he identified the eight different aspects of brainwashing. And as we went through that, the person who was my deprogrammer started reading through that. And with each point, because she was a former member of the group I was in, she could point out how that was just like what happened. Isn't that true? Isn't that there in the Unification Church? Isn't that one true in about point four or something? That's when it all came crashing down. It was like all of a sudden I saw what had happened. It wasn't that it was true, it was that it was a manipulation. And so that's how it happened. And as far as rebuilding, it, well, I spent a good part of a decade in counseling. I had lots of help. I was worked at a rehab house for people coming out of cults. That helped a lot as far as my kind of figuring out what had happened to me. But it was a long path to reconstructing my identity. And that's why it's so important to have an environment where people can shorten the distance of that path.
Yeah, thank you. I want to follow up on that before I get to the next audience question. I also want to invite more audience questions. But with that, I remember you telling me that a lot of the work is really in care, and it's really in, this is going back to when we first spoke in 2022, 2023. You had said it's about preservation of agency and understanding, that was your word, agency specifically, and understanding how they had implicitly surrendered agency. And that's a lot of discussion, as I understood, where you said we create an alternative community for them because they're seeking, part of this was seeking community, as you discussed. But now you're telling me this takes a tremendous amount of time to do the healing. You need to have a community available so that you don't hop. Is this scalable? I mean, I see, my assessment is that there are massive problems in entrenched beliefs around the world right now, very strong emotions, and trying to help people out of that to find a healthier community has to take a tremendous amount of effort. And I'm curious, how does one get to scale on that instead of taking long one-on-one engagements? I guess that's part of the work that you're trying to do, right?
Yes, it, we at our nonprofit have spent a lot of time and have a lot of consultation with and people on our team that are public health experts, and to look at how do you scale a solution. And a lot of it is kind of a hub and spoke model in that we're creating models, frameworks, tools that are shareable. And working with community leaders and customizing those tools and that information so that they can do prevention and also healing work with people, prevention, intervention, and healing work with people within their communities that have their specific issues. People within different communities, different parts of the world, different situations, socioeconomic. Um, their vulnerabilities are a little different. The reasons they were pulled into different types of controlling environments were different. And so the understanding of how that works needs to be customized a little bit. But that's how it can be scalable by, first of all, having a good evidence base about how psychological manipulation really does work in the 5 phases, and then how people can regain their agency. It's exciting to think about agency and autonomy and reclaiming that. And so we really try to emphasize that. It doesn't have to be a long therapeutic process. Some people have underlying mental health issues, and but I think that I remember one person, I just a little story, we went through this deprogramming process, and at the end of it, we all agreed, family, everyone, that he wanted to leave. And so we went out and to a beach and we're walking along the beach with him. He took off running and we thought maybe he was escaping, going back. But he long ways up there, we found him and talked to him, and he said, "I'm free." And so it's a double-edged sword in that yes, there's grieving and loss and but there's also this blank slate and this freedom. And if you have help from people who understand agency, Sunita Saw, type that are focused on agency that can help people realize how valuable that is, how valuable it is to be in control of your decisions and to have your autonomy, then I think that path is greatly shortened.
Thank you. And you mentioned Sunita Saw. For those who aren't familiar, she was a colleague at the Cambridge Business School who's now at Cornell. And she was on the same panel that you shared in 2023. And now you're collaborating with her, I understand.
Yes.
Just so her work is at Cornell if you want to look her up. SAH is her last name. I want to get to another audience question. And actually, I could help answer this one too. Have you explored the parallels between the techniques used by confidence men and those used by cult leaders? And then many victims of cons don't come forward because they feel foolish. In reality, victims must have a level of intelligence to be manipulated. I'm going to speak. One of the whole starts of the Cambridge Disinformation Project was I started noticing parallels in these manipulation games. I've been doing work on understanding and deconstructing financial frauds for years, working with people who had actually orchestrated financial frauds. Sam Antar, call out to Sam, who's the chief financial officer of Crazy Eddie. He orchestrated one of the then largest securities frauds. And he unpacks a lot of these techniques that I see being repeated in politics. I see it repeated in religious organizations that are on the cult side, things like that. And one of the other things that's interesting with respect to this is that on this point, I started doing some work on crypto, some of the crypto, and particularly the meme side of crypto, the meme asset side of crypto. And a lot of that is cult-like. In fact, there is a crypto coin called Cult, CULT, that has a cult manifesto, and it is all about community. And one of the darkest parts of that is that when people, the shame piece comes up, the shame is so powerful that many of these people are so ashamed of being taken advantage of that there's actually a high suicide rate associated with being affiliated with that. So a lot of people won't even get the help. Do you have any thoughts on parallels though, Dan? Do you see patterns?
Um, Yeah, it's a need that people have, and when someone and you get kind of addicted to having that kind of dopamine hit in a way, and you think that you're going to get rich, and or you think that you're going to be famous, or you think that you're smarter than your family, your friends, whoever. You've got the ticket to success. And so once you feel that kind of adrenaline rush, that dopamine hit, those chemicals start surging, you really want to hang on to it. And there's a definite parallel with addiction, I think. We can learn a lot from our understanding of how addiction works. And so um, I do think that it doesn't matter what the product is or the pack of lies that is being sold. It doesn't matter what the disinformation is, as much as whether it's supercharged with those things that can cause a kind of an addiction response.
Thank you. And a shout out, by the way, to Anna Lemke, Lembke, who is a neuroscientist at Stanford, who has some of the most intuitive video content and books on dopamine addiction, which relates into what we've been talking about in online addiction. I want to, before I go to the next audience question, I want to ask a question too. One of the things that I actually try to articulate today when we have conversations about this stuff is that we're seeing a lot of stuff happening online, but it's important to recognize that your experience was in person. So this kind of manipulative practice can happen on any platform. Do you think you would have been as drawn in if Reverend Moon and all of this was an online sort of parasocial relationship, a one way, they're on the screen staring at you on their phone? Do you think it would have been as powerful? Did you need the face to face to really bind?
I don't, I think that obviously it is happening online. So it is happening a lot online. And so I don't think so necessarily, because what's happening online is replacing in so many ways the face to face, and that's society wide. I think it's a problem society wide. So the tools and the techniques have shifted, but they're the same. Whether if I had been born 100 years prior, I could have maybe got into some cult-like setting then. Or, the Hitler Youth is no different really than terrorist groups of today. And so, or you could extrapolate all kinds of things there. But uh, yeah, I think that it doesn't matter that much. It's um, it's really about what's going on a psychological level, and whether or not they can, whether it's happening algorithmically, and the that relationship between influencers and platforms that are competing for our attention. And once you get the attention, then the goal is to hold attention. And that's where the dopamine kind of stuff comes in. A lot of the most successful influencers are really loaded with dopamine type of information. And that's addictive, and so the same thing happens. It's just a different mechanism that the manipulation is happening on.
So I'm going to go to the audience. You mentioned five phases: vulnerability, initiation, active, leaving, and healing. What's your thought about the most effective phase to attempt intervention before healing, pre-healing? And must interventions be tailored to the phase a victim is in, as well as their specific circumstances?
Um, yes, tailoring. And the most important thing is to realize what phase they're in so that you can kind of customize your approach accordingly. Someone who is in the initiation stage is in that really excited, they feel like they found their people kind of phase. And that's a really difficult place to get into. In one respect, you have to really be careful about um, not making them defensive, because that'll push them further in. But if you can make them aware of, hey, you might want to be careful, and here's why, that's different than someone who's been in some controlling environment for a long time and they're thinking about leaving, there's so much at stake with their pride and their integrity and all of that that you have to be aware of. And you're going to have to customize how you approach them differently. And so, yes, you have to understand each of the phases and understand what phase they're in, and you have to have empathy for their situation, no matter which phase they're in. And you have to uh, have some communication techniques really that focus on protecting their pride and dignity as you help them see that there's a possibility that they may be taken advantage of for someone else's gain, either for power, money, or influence. And if you focus on the mechanics and the manipulator, no matter what phase they're in, and make sure that they understand that you respect them and that you understand that the reason they're there is for very good reasons. Almost always, people, no matter whether it was the people I talked to who were in prison because of being part of the insurrection, or someone that was in some um, following some guru to create peace on earth. It doesn't matter which one it is. They're good people who had good intentions, who were there, who bought into this because they really felt that there was something important. And so, no matter who you're talking to, you have to get in touch with their underlying core value systems. Why were they involved in this? And have respect for why they were involved in it if you're going to talk to them. Otherwise, kind of don't bother because you'll only make them more defensive if you don't have some kind of empathy for their situation.
Yeah, you mentioned empathy. I hear this quite a bit, and even I try to practice this too. So, a lot of people are concerned about loved ones who have fallen down all kinds of traps. Often it's political beliefs or something,
Yeah,
and it triggers their own stuff. It triggers anger, resentment, frustration. How could you? Can't you see this kind of a lot of like because a lot of it is very emotive, right? So is there is and clearly that doesn't work, right? If I start waving a finger at you, you should know better, which is what we call the Thanksgiving dinner now in the United
yeah.
States, right? Um, we know that that doesn't work. That typically is sort of like an identity crisis. It triggers them back, and then everybody gets defensive. So, how can one actually engage this work? Do we need an interventionist? Like, I mean, because you came in as an interventionist. Is it better to have somebody who is not emotionally committed to the relationship to come in?
Not necessarily. And if that were the case, then it would be really difficult to scale. And so, anyone who cares enough to really learn about what psychological manipulation is and what works and doesn't work, and learn some effective communication skills, especially communication skills in difficult conversations. Those are things that we already know how to do to teach communication skills in difficult conversations. Those kind of techniques, along with a deep understanding of psychological manipulation, anyone can learn how to be more effective and when to push and when to pull back and how to maintain that relationship so that you can continue to work toward helping them understand that maybe they're being taken advantage of. No one wants to play the fool. No one wants to be part of a scam of some sort. So the hard part is maintaining a relationship that's not going to make them more defensive, but to help them understand that what if, what if they're being manipulated and that's your only concern. And if you start caring about their belief systems, which that's a really hard thing not to do, because a lot of it is you feel just this, I can't believe you believe such a stupid thing. And that's really difficult to stay out of. But the more you understand what's really going on and you have in your toolbox some effective techniques of communication, then you can use that. And over a course of time, you can become the person who helps them out. Yes, interventionists sometimes, but again, that's just not scalable. We have to teach people that care enough about learning what it is and how to do it. There's nothing that complicated about it. It's not some highly specialized, that you need a professional mental health person necessarily. There are some circumstances where there's underlying mental health issues, but typically anyone can learn how to be more effective in that.
Yeah, I remember you saying, well, one thing I remember is it's about being curious about the underlying anxiety and
Yes.
questioning the why
Yeah.
behind it. Why are you,
Yes.
what are these beliefs doing for you and your anxiety? So recognizing that
Mm.
this is coming from an anxiety position. And I remember one thing that you'd said to me way back that stuck with me that I've shared with as many audiences. This is why we're recording this too. Is I remember you saying that often when we get into these entrenched beliefs, polarization, we can't share any facts. And so there's no basis for communication. But the one basis that we always agree on is we loathe feeling manipulated and
Yes.
exploited.
Yes.
And so I remember you saying something. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I remember you had said to me, you start there in conversation sometimes.
Yes. I, you have to get their permission to talk about this subject. And it can't be around whether they're right or wrong. So you have to start with when I'm, for instance, when I'm talking with a loved one and they're saying, my daughter's in this thing, whatever. And so I start by asking them about what do you love about your daughter? What do you think underlying they were getting out of this? What did they need in their life? What did they care about? What were they passionate about? What do you think they lacked in their life? Where was their pain points? Because if you can understand what their pain points were and who they were as a human being, and you care about that and you use that as what you go back to over and over again, then that person that you're talking to will feel heard, they'll feel loved, they'll feel cared about around the issues that are important to them. And that's bigger than the pack of lies they've bought into. And so you can work around the lies and the disinformation and the manipulative belief system to that core who they really are and build from there. That's really important.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because when I talk about this, I say that everything is sourcing pain and grievance. And the opportunists I've studied are going for grievance. The number one thing they're searching for right now is grievance. Um,
Yes, and it's so easy to find right now. It during social unrest is when you see the greatest like blooming of cult-like uh, groups. Because people are in pain and they're lost and they don't know what to do and they're angry and fearful. Anger and fear are very uncomfortable emotions. And so when someone can take that anger and point it at an enemy, cause divisiveness and say, that's the problem, they're the problem, that's an easy manipulation tool. And fear, if you can take someone's fear away, we really can build a better world. We just have to work together. That's a really appealing pull.
yeah, also on the pain point, one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of work in the space of manipulative practice is in the health and wellness communities online with sort of the natural remedy stuff and the fitness. We're seeing a lot of it in that space. I want to go to, we're going to move into, I'm going to combine two questions. They're a little bit provocative, and you can punt on this if you
Okay,
wish.
good.
Do you feel that the act of manipulation is more often used to influence people who are politically left or politically right, coupled with is MAGA more like a cult or political position? So I'm going to ask those together. And you can say, I don't want to go there.
Well, I've publicly said, so it's no secret that I can look at, for instance, the mega movement and see correlations between other cult-like groups. And so it's the correlations, again, not the belief system. Left or right doesn't matter so much as whether it's they're able to tap into someone's fears and anger and use whatever they kind of already believe to control their behaviors and ultimately their identity. And so you, you work with what is already there. So if there's a lot of people that felt like government was too big and they were taking too much taxes and it was harming me and all these, people with all these progressive things. I don't really believe all that stuff. That's going too far. And then you can use that. If somebody is on the other side and very progressive and really angry at what's going on the right, you can use that. Whatever people are um, passionate about, concerned about, worried about, in pain about, that's what you use to build your group and your following and that's how you make money, that's how you gain power, that's how you gain influence. So it doesn't matter so much what the belief system is, but you do have to cater to that belief system. That's your target market.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting too. One of the things with the summit, a lot of people accuse us of having a political lean, which we try like not to do because what we're interested in is the structural elements. And today it's this particular structural element doing cult-like work. Tomorrow it's going to be somebody else doing it. And it is, in my mind, it's opportunistic based on the context. And also, if I were to try to just simply monetize, I think to some degree the algorithms are monetizing everything, all the
Mhm.
agitation, all of it. And so for them, they're agnostic, I think, to
Yeah.
some degree,
They're just
because
looking
if
for
it,
money. Yeah.
if I can make money on the agitation, then I will. It also speaks a little bit to my colleague David Stilwell's work going back probably 15 years or so, where he identified that with 225 likes from Facebook, he could predict personality profile as well as a marriage partner. And with that kind of data, coupled it with Amazon purchasing, et cetera, and all the other data we leave in our tracks, I can pretty much identify who's vulnerable very quickly
Yes.
and memify them. um, so I want to go back to the audience. What signs are there that someone may be being psychologically manipulated?
Um, Usually there's kind of a change of personality and they become real advocates of a perspective or a belief system or a way of thinking, and it's supercharged. And there's like you can see that they feel really empowered and that they feel like they've found the ultimate truth. And if they don't want to hear an alternative perspective, or if they have all kinds of defenses set up to push back on alternative perspectives, that's a good sign that there's some controlling going on. Um, and a good way to test it is to have a conversation about psychological manipulation and what it is and how it works and the mechanics of it, and see how much they are willing to talk about that and to look at their newly excited point of view as as a possibility that they're being manipulated. It it kind of boils down to that.
So I want to go back. I want to see if we can get as concrete of a starter kit. If I were a parent with a child and I think they're sucked into maybe it's the manosphere or whatever concern, whatever they're doing online, what might be the first conversation you have with them? How would that go if you were role playing in a way?
Um, I think I would say, I'd like to talk to you about something. I just read this article or I just saw this podcast, whatever, on psychological manipulation. It's a really interesting topic, and I'd love to just have a conversation with you about it. Would you be willing to talk with me about it? And I would just start with seeing how open they were to have a conversation about it. I mean, you have to do some homework first and really understand what it is you're going to be talking with them about. It's a little more difficult. there's a little more prep involved than there would be if you were just going to argue, put your a stack of facts that go against everything they believe. That's like kind of an easier solution, but it doesn't work at all. But so understanding how the mechanics of psychological manipulation work is the first step. And once you feel pretty solid in that, then you want to have a conversation with them about that possibility. That's why with the AIM, uh, with our AIM project, the first thing we want to do is to kind of get out into the zeitgeist, kind of this concept of an anti-manipulation identity, that we should all want an anti-manipulation identity. Especially, it's not hard to point to the fact that everyone is competing for our attention. And everyone wants to hold our attention and to manipulate our attention. And so if you can say, okay, we know that's going on in the world. And so everyone should want to have an anti-manipulation identity. And so that's the first kind of message that needs to go out into the world, sort of by using influencers and such, and having influencers start talking about creating an anti-manipulation identity and how to not be sucked in to people who are just trying to scam you. And it's pretty clear that that's what the algorithms are trying to do, is to take, to use you, your assets. We're all just assets waiting to be had by these algorithms and these influencers and such. And so I think that's the first step, is to create that anti-manipulation identity. And so if you want to talk with someone who you think is being manipulated, you want to kind of sell them on the idea first that of course you don't want to be taken advantage of. No one does. I don't, you don't, you're too smart for that. But it's so powerful these days. Let's just talk about how to protect yourself from it. And then they can start saying, oh, maybe that is going on with me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I find a much maybe it's my echo chamber, but I find a lot of latent frustration with this attention, and I think people are becoming more aware of addiction and fatigue
Yeah.
around feeling manipulated. And I mean, I'm thinking about surrendering my cell phone forever and things like that. I mean, it's interesting to think about, and there's all these apps about touch grass, I think is one of them. I haven't tried it,
Yeah.
where you have
Yeah.
to physically touch grass in order to get your phone to work. That's interesting. So, but to create an identity. So, one of the things that you keep saying, and you are the one who brings up community, community, community in all of our prior conversations, and identity. These are the two things that I constantly hear a lot about: this social identity, this feeling of who am I, what am I about, what values am I doing? And I do think that this anti-manipulation, I refuse to allow myself to be, I mean, we're all vulnerable, but I refuse to allow myself to be prey to victimization. I'm going to be skeptical. I think I can be too skeptical in some ways, but I actually think that's an interesting framing of that. Are you doing any policy discussions around algorithms, around any of that stuff? Are you engaged with
It,
policy? Should we be
uh,
engaged with policy?
well, yeah, we should be engaged in policy. I think that if, like, when you look at things like just things that have been successful in public health, let's say seatbelts or smoking, or the way that the message got out there and the way that it happened is, yes, teaching people that smoking causes cancer is one thing, but when things really changed, according to public health experts that I've talked with, is when policies changed. Like, for instance, you can't smoke in an airplane, you can't smoke in a public building when those policies are in place. So yes, we need guardrails, but I think that a lot of focus has been guardrails around disinformation, which I don't think that's a viable process. I think instead guardrails around that are intentionally manipulative tactics that are meant to take advantage of people's psychological situation. Those are the guardrails and the policies that I think we need to work toward putting in place. And so big we, all of us need to work together toward that.
Yeah, I want to invite the audience. We have about 5 or 6 more minutes, so please get in your last minute questions. Okay, here we go. What a wonderful talk. So thank you. If I'm understanding this properly, it suggests that part of contemporary digital literacy should include the development of an anti-manipulation identity. And one of the key contemporary digital literacy skills we should teach is understanding how manipulation works. Do you think digital literacy is a good lens to contextualize this, or is there a better framework? That's a great question.
Yes, and yes, and I think absolutely that's an excellent place to do it. And because, and like you just pointed out a minute ago, it's kind of being talked about a lot these days, touch the grass, or, you have too much screen time. The teenager in the basement that never comes out, they live online. And how to talk about attention integrity and being in control of what you listen to, how much you listen to it, all of that kind of work to help people understand how to take care of themselves around it, and other places too. Like we work with faith leaders to give them kind of a toolbox to help them understand how to work in their community. All public health efforts you have to get into the grassroots. You have to work with people where they are and talk to people in a language they can understand. So this conversation has to go on kind of everywhere, but especially right now, I think in the online world is a really good place to focus because it's so much is happening there.
Okay, thank you. If someone recognizes someone else is in a vulnerable state to be manipulated, I guess we all are at some point. Anyway, what tips or guardrails do you suggest at the personal level?
Um, One is to understand your own vulnerability. It's not a bad thing. Vulnerability, Brené Brown's work, I don't know, about vulnerability being a good thing. Um, I think a lot of times you can talk to them about the fact that teenagers, for instance, that there's a lot of people that are out there to get you. There's people that will take advantage of you. There's nothing like stories, the power of stories, people that have been through a similar thing and can tell their story and say, look, I was like you, and I wouldn't want this path for anyone. It was really painful and humiliating to come out the other side and to have to say, yeah, I was taken advantage of. So these stories of people that have gone through and come out the other side and can share, those are so powerful. And that's why the Stories Bank is such a big part of our plan, is that the more actual stories we have of a variety of different types of people who've come out the other side and can talk articulately about their story, and those stories can be shared in various communities and with various demographics of vulnerability. Those most at risk is where we should focus, is prevention and helping them understand what could happen to them should they fall prey, you know.
Yeah, thank you. The empathy piece resonates very strongly, and I think that's important. I also think when we've been talking about thinking in terms of interventions, it is recognizing that the vulnerability in this case, the most at least the one common theme again is this grievance and pain point about anxiety about the future, anxiety about what's happening in the world. And so just meeting people there and understanding and listening to that grievance and giving an outlet for
Yes.
them to express it instead of them holding it in. So a lot of the narratives are, suck it up and hold it and to channel it into anger, by the way. If you're in pain, the acceptable channel of the pain is anger instead of having a conversation with somebody who cares, and then you can channel it into art or music or going outside or athletics
Yes.
or something constructive.
The exit ramp is kind of the big challenge. Marketing is kind of the challenge for that first phase of the anti-manipulation identity, and then learning is the second phase. But that third phase, what do we actually have to offer people that is safe? Where are those communities where people can gather and not be taken advantage of? Where can people grow and learn in a safe environment, where they're not being taken advantage of?
So I'm conscious of time. I want to thank you for coming, but first, can you tell us where people can find the resources that you're talking about? Because you mentioned like the AIM and others, like where can they source this stuff if they want to have
Well,
access?
we're building right now. Like most CEOs of nonprofits, one of my main uh, things I do is look for funding to build these programs. But antidote.ngo is our website, and there's lots of places on that site if you want to get involved, if you want to. if you're looking for help, that's where to go to find me, find our work.
Okay, thank you. And shout out to all the potential people who have access to funding. We all need funding, so please send funding
Yeah, everybody does.
Diane's way. Thank you, Diane. Thank you for sharing your morning with us because you're in the West Coast US or sort of in the West US, as I understand.
Yeah, I'm in
Um,
Arizona where we're having a heat wave. It's going to be 101 today or something.
we have a heat wave in Cambridge. It's sunny, which is a rare day in Cambridge. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions about this event, feel free to push them over to me by email, and I can share them with Diane, and maybe we can get in touch. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and
Thank
thank you
you
all
for
for
having me,
attending.
Ellen. Yeah, thank you all.